Check out this graph. It shows what's been happening to India's economy over the last 60 years. Pretty stable, right? It's basically been growing non-stop. Now look at what happens with the population during the same time frame. It triples, or to put it more simply, there are nearly 1 billion more Indians now. And get this, India, a former British colony controlled and oppressed by London for several centuries, recently overtook that very same London. That means India now produces more goods and services than the UK. And ahead of India there are only 4 countries: the US, China, Japan and Germany. But despite all this, India remains a very poor country. If you look at GDP per capita, the average Indian lives roughly like someone in Nicaragua, Cambodia or Haiti. Still, every year more oil flows into India, and they are producing more software, pharmaceuticals, machinery and movies. All in all, India earned the reputation of being the world's most promising economy. But at the same time, the country is constantly in conflict with its neighbor, Pakistan. And for the last 75 years, they've occupied territories that Pakistan claims as theirs. Some say there are 3 potential conflicts that today could trigger World War III, a nuclear one, a probably last one. Number 1, easy, a big fight between the United States, Russia or China. And as you can see, it could start anywhere, Ukraine or Taiwan. The third most likely scenario is a war between Israel and Iran. Israel presumably have nuclear weapons, while Tehran doesn't, yet desperately wants them to restore order in the region. And in the second place, as a potential reason for global nuclear apocalypse, is exactly this confrontation between 2 official nuclear powers, India and Pakistan. And crazy thing is, they used to be one country, British India or the Raj. Just look at their flag. It's pretty similar to the ones Canada used until 1964, or like Australia's and New Zealand's today. For those who doesn't know, they were all part of one big British empire. It all begins with Vasco da Gama. And if you, like me, didn't give a shit about history in school, he was that Portuguese sailor who, unlike Columbus, who was trying to get to India but got lost and found America instead, actually found the first sea route from Europe to India. Europeans wanted this route to trade quicker and better overseas. At first, both Europeans and Indians were making good money off this trade. But the guys from the West soon did the math. Their weapons were way stronger, plus India wasn't one united people. It had something like 400 different ethnic groups. So the British conquered India and then skillfully used the famous tactic divide and conquer. Over 2 centuries in charge, they incited or even orchestrated various conflicts to make sure their subjects fought among themselves, not against British authority. Meanwhile, the British milked the place for all it was worth. They took a lot from India: sugar, tea, spices, cotton, wool, especially wool, which Britain's new factories badly needed as the Industrial Revolution kicked into gear. And then everything these factories produced, textiles, clothes, machinery, was sold back to India. The British especially nailed it with tea. Tea was basically grown and sold by only one country, China. There were monopolists who set the prices and dictated terms. Sneaky bastards! That was a pain in the ass, especially since tea was becoming increasingly popular among wealthy Europeans. Negotiating favorable terms with China back then wasn't really working. So they decided to send a spy instead. A Scottish botanist, Robert Fortune, snuck into Chinese tea plantations and learned all their secrets. Meanwhile, back in India, ancient forests in the region of Assam were cleared to make room for huge tea plantations. By 1860, the British were shipping their first batches of Indian-grown tea to Europe. And today, India is one of the global leaders in tea production.
Outside the Constituent Assembly, crowds again broke through the police cordon.
When people get pushed around, someone always shows up to push back. In India, that person was Mahatma Gandhi. Many of you probably know his ideas about non-violent resistance. His passionate speeches ultimately brought down the British Empire, leading to India's independence. And it all went down in 1942 in Bombay. That's where Gandhi called on a massive crowd to openly defy colonial authorities, declaring India's future independence from the British Empire. He told his fellow Indians to let go of all prejudices, personal, racial, caste-based or national, and he put forward his famous slogan, "Do or die." The way he put it roughly was, either we free India or we die trying. We will not live to watch the continuation of our slavery. For the British colonial administration, Gandhi's movement was a massive headache. Why? Because you can't deal with a protest, you can't suppress a revolution, and you can't drown an uprising in blood. But what can you do with a guy whose only weapon is a wooden stick? Sure, the fierce British Prime Minister Churchill openly suggested in his speeches to starve Gandhi to death in prison, but in the end, Gandhi's ideology won. India became independent.
On August 15, 1947, the great symbol of the British Empire came down for the last time, to be replaced by the banner of the new Indian government.
But unfortunately, the violence didn't end there. In fact, it was just getting started. When Hindus and Muslims finally got their long-awaited freedom, they started killing each other even more brutally than the British forces had. Eventually, the former colony split into India and Pakistan.
The partition of colonial India into two separate religious states. Pakistan, with 100 million Muslims, is created as a counterpart to India with 300 million Hindu.
And one of the main problems was that the borders between India and Pakistan were drawn in just 40 days by a guy who, believe it or not, had never ever been to India. He did it based solely on colonial census data. The logic was simple. If a region had a Muslim majority, welcome to Pakistan. If Hindu, welcome to India. But remember, India had far more than just two ethnic groups. And on top of that, most local princes didn't want to join either India or Pakistan. They just wanted their own independence. Yet everyone knew there was no other option. Otherwise, the division would have led to even more violence. In the end, pretty much every state made its choice. However, three of them basically said, "Screw your bloody map, we're doing it our way." The first was Junagadh. Here's what they did. Completely ignoring those newly drawn maps, they decided to join Pakistan, even though they didn't share a land border. But who cares? They figured they would communicate with their future center by sea. But the Indians weren't having it. Hello, 96% of your people are Hindu. Pakistan? Really? You better join India right now. Don't want to? Fine, looks like we're doing this the old-fashioned way. Delhi cut off fuel and coal supplies, stopped air and mail communication, and of course sent troops in. The local ruler fled to Pakistan and Junagadh joined India. But Jammu and Kashmir had a different fate. Most of the people there, around 77%, were Muslims. Yet the local ruler leaned toward India and didn't want to join Pakistan. He even suggested staying independent and just signing profitable trade agreements without, any obligations. Then it was like, what the hell? They're taking our Muslims away. They must be protected immediately. Pakistani forces invaded the rebellious territory, planning to take it by force. The local leader responded by asking India for help, ultimately signing an agreement to join India, not Pakistan. And how did that turn out? For the past 75 years, these territories have remained disputed, and constant fighting continues. Just look, India controls around 60% and Pakistan about 40%. China even grabbed a small piece for themselves. And both India and Pakistan claimed the entire region, calling the areas controlled by the other side occupied territories. But even outside these disputed areas, once the borders were set, everything went into chaos and people started killing each other. Muslims from India rushed to Muslim-majority Pakistan. while Hindus from Pakistan fled in the opposite direction. The ethnic violence eventually killed around 1 million people and displaced another 13 million.
In the trail of murder and arson come the refugees. Their suffering is the new tragedy of India. Carrying their few possessions, they flee from savagery and butchery that has never been exceeded even in India's stormy history.
Just so you don't think that Pakistan today is purely Islamic and India purely Hindu, no. India officially has around 200 million Muslims today. Just think about it. That's the population of a huge country. For instance, in Pakistan the number of Muslims is around the same, 233 million. Yeah, you would think, what could they possibly have to fight over when they are so similar? But if you noticed, there is also a third player here, China. Back in the 60s, Pakistan deliberately handed over a part of its territory to China in exchange for military and diplomatic support. They even helped Pakistan develop military strategies to hold India back if needed. Why? Because for China, India is the main competitor in the region. For instance, pay attention to a curious event from early 2022. On January 25, Xi Jinping held an online summit with the presidents of Central Asian countries: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. And just 2 days later, the Prime Minister of India had basically the same online meeting with exactly the same guys. Now seriously, they couldn't all just talk together at once? On the one hand, China clearly has more money and technology. For example, they promised to buy more food from these countries, build gas and oil pipelines and construct modern roads. Everything to pull the neighbors closer to themselves. But remember, all Central Asian countries practice Islam, and naturally they're aware of how the Chinese treat their own local Muslims, the kind of repression the government conducts against anyone who disagrees with party policy. And remember how many Muslims there are in India? Sure, India might not be as wealthy or influential as China to Central Asia, but maybe it's closer and easier to understand, and importantly, not likely to oppress Muslims. And India might feel more relatable and closer to the West too, because India has the second largest English-speaking population in the world after the United States, 230 million people. Even in the birthplace of English itself, the United Kingdom, there are only 64. And it's exactly these English-speaking educated people that India is betting on. Look, there is this list called Fortune 500. You've probably heard of it. It lists the 500 largest companies worldwide. So a few years ago, 185 of them use software made in India. If you've got tens or even hundreds of millions of educated English-speaking people, you're definitely becoming a key player in the global IT market. Because practically all your IT specialists speak the most important international language fluently. And statistically speaking, with such a massive population, you'll inevitably have tons of tech specialists anyway. India already has nearly 5 million today. How did they even get so many? It all started right here, in the city of Bangalore. Today it's called the Silicon Valley of India, because almost every significant local startup is born here. And right here you'll find offices of Google, Apple, Microsoft, IBM, Adobe, SAP, basically all the IT giants. 50 years ago, nobody here thought about IT. Instead, they were focused on developing cutting-edge technology for India's defense sector. And they chose a city with plenty of people. Bangalore ranks third by population after Delhi and Mumbai. And on the other hand, it's also safely distant from India's main rivals, Pakistan and China. Right after independence, India actually lived under a planned economy. And back then, Bangalore looked more like a Soviet-style scientific research institute than a hub of Silicon Valley garage startups. But in the 80s, when the Soviet Union started clearly falling apart in front of everyone, countries like China and India realized that you can't centrally plan innovation from above. They understood clearly that without Western money and technology, nothing would really happen. So they began to give entrepreneurs more freedom. And exactly here in Bangalore in 1981, with an initial capital of just $250, one of India's wealthiest companies was born, Infosys. Today its value is roughly $50 billion. Starting in 1984, American companies began opening branches here. Can you guess why? They wanted skilled engineers taking advantage of India's low development costs. Then, after the Soviet Union collapsed completely and India, like China, started liberalizing its economy, Infosys truly began thriving. By 1993, the company had gone public and built India's first programmer campus. Pretty soon, people from all over India rushed to Bangalore to study and find work. And by the early 2000s, those promising IT startups began appearing everywhere. Today, among the 6 global capitals of unicorns, companies that exploded out of nowhere and quickly grew to be worth at least $1 billion, first place obviously goes to San Francisco. New York comes second, then Beijing and Shanghai, London is 5th, and guess what? Bangalore rounds off this prestigious list at number 6. But having 5 million successful tech workers in a country doesn't mean life is great for everyone else. And remember, everyone else adds up to more than 1 billion people. You've probably heard that people nowadays compare India to China 20 or 30 years ago. Rapid economic growth, massive population, cheap labor, and everyone who's got natural resources hopes that India's economy will demand more and more energy, gas, oil and minerals. And indeed, India is currently 3rd in the world after the United States and China for oil consumption. At the same time, anyone who wants to make things cheap is looking at India's billion workers. But the difference between India and China is that they chose completely different development models. Beijing clearly copied the success of South Korea, Taiwan and Singapore. Back in the 80s, Deng Xiaoping attracted huge Western investments to build endless factories where former Chinese peasants, practically robots themselves, worked for pennies. And India, despite its huge and cheap population, chose a different path. Instead of producing cheap consumer goods for the entire world, India focused on complex industries, software, pharmaceuticals and high-tech components. Those sectors require people with expensive educations, which means the English-speaking Indian minority benefits greatly. And anyone else will keep living in poverty. And when anyone else means 1 billion people, things clearly aren't all that rosy. India recently overtook China and became the most populous country on earth, and importantly, people there are much younger than in any developed or developing country. Half of all Indians today are younger than 25. Just compare the average age of an Indian, a Chinese person and a Japanese. Such a youthful society can easily and quickly adapt to new technologies and even drive their growth. But on the other hand, imagine how incredibly hard is it to survive in a country where statistically 1 million new people enter the job market every month. The competition is absolutely insane. Just think about how important is it for a country with the largest and youngest human resources in the world not to slip into nationalism or war with its neighbors, but to continue growing economically and pulling everyone else upward too. See ya.